Okay, let me start over again. So good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us again for our fall lecture. And as those who were here last week, we've been going over the Dhammapada now, and we finished the first section on twin verses. But what I wanted to show you, actually, starting off today, I'm going to share my screen here for a second. Can you all see this? Let me expand it a bit. Okay, so this is the Noble Eightfold Path, right? And I think you recall me saying that the Dhammapada is one of the early Buddhist texts, and it's primarily used by what we call the Theravada Buddhists. The Theravada Buddhists are the Buddhism that spread through Southern Asia. One might say the Theravada is literally the way of the elders. So they adhere strictly to some of the early texts, including the Dhammapada. So when we look at the Theravada Buddhism, the other feature of Theravada Buddhism is this Noble Eightfold Path. Of course, the Noble Eightfold Path is important to all Buddhists, but Theravada really stresses the Noble Eightfold Path as a way to a pathway to enlightenment. So when we look at this Dhammapada then, and compare it with the Noble Eightfold Path, you begin to see something very interesting. So if we just going over those twin verses again, just comparing it with this, the very first one says everything is led by the mind, right? So in this Eightfold Noble Path, you'll see right view and right thought as the first top two here. And that's talking about the mind, right? So this Dhammapada is also very much emphasizing, first of all, the right view and right thoughts. So if you look at, like, for instance, the third line, he abused me, he beat me, he defeated me, he robbed me. The hatred in him who harbors such thoughts is never pacified. So again, we're talking about thoughts, right? So right thoughts here. Again, so the Dhammapada is very much following this Eightfold Noble Path, and so this twin verses is mainly about views and thoughts. And conversely, then the next section that we're going to be dealing with today is the section on diligence. And so, if I just hang on a second, let me just pull that up. Excuse me for a second. Okay, and I'm just going to share the screen with you. And so when we look at the diligence, right here, starting with 21, and maybe I'll get Tanis to read 21 and 22.
Diligence is the path of deathlessness. Negligence is the path of death. He who is, I've written one, I've changed the masculine and feminine.
Oh, okay, yeah, well, that's fine. One is fine. Please change it.
One who is negligent is like a dead person. One who is not negligent does not die. And 22, understanding this clearly, the wise are not negligent, and they delight in diligence and rejoice in the way of the sages.
Okay, thank you. So when we think of that, okay, and I'm going to just go back again to, where is it? I opened up the wrong thing. Okay. So when we think of diligence now, we're talking about right action, right? And right effort is what we're talking about with diligence, right? So again, these are following the next two of the
Eightfold Path.
Eightfold Path, right? So if we look at that comparison again, diligence is a path to deathlessness. So what this means is by being diligent, and what it means by diligence here is to be mindful of your actions at the moment. And by doing so, then you don't have to worry about the future or what's going to happen. If you take care of the moment, then the future will take care of itself. Okay. Perhaps some of you might know that, you know, when you're really involved in a project, let's say, and you're giving 100% of your effort and your time just flies by, right? And conversely, when you're bored, if you're not really paying attention to something, time can drag by, right? So in the same sense, when you're talking about diligence here, it's being mindful of your actions. It's being mindful of the Dharma. And if we're mindful of it every moment, then we don't have to worry about what's going to happen after we pass away, because you're living a very fulfilled life and you don't actually have the time to worry too much about what's going to happen. But being mindful of it, following the practices, then it's said that everything will take care of itself and you don't have to, won't have to worry about the future. So he who is negligent is like a dead person. He who is not negligent does not die. So again, here they're talking about the fact that, you know, our physical body, all of us, obviously we will pass away physically. But in the sense that if you're living each moment to the fullest, then for us, death is nothing. It's just a point along the continuum, and you have less anxiety towards it. Let's put it that way. Understanding this clearly, the wise are not negligent, and they delight in diligence and rejoice in the way of the sages. So one of the things about diligence, which is very difficult, of course, with particularly the Theravada, or the way of the elders, was that they did lead a very strict monastic lifestyle. And it meant, you know, having very, very limited material goods. In fact, they had a very strict code of what they were able to possess. And by getting rid of the possessions, they were freeing themselves from attachments. Okay, so being diligent to that was considered the highest practice is to follow, being very diligent to that. Some of you, maybe most of you, may have recalled, I think a couple Shotsuki services ago, I gave a talk on stuff and how I really liked, there was a comedian, he's passed away now, by the name of George Carlin. And George Carlin was brilliant with what he could do with language. And he did a whole monologue on stuff. And you can actually Google it. If you Google George Carlin and stuff, it's a wonderful, very Buddhistic comedy monologue in which he talks about how we as human beings, we end up, you know, our goal in life is to gather stuff, and not just any stuff. It has to be my stuff, because the stuff of other people is not good stuff, but my stuff is good stuff. And he goes on and on about stuff. And so similarly, or from this perspective of the Dhammapada, getting rid of that stuff is very important. And it's interesting too, though, how this has become a booming industry. And in fact, there's a Japanese lady who has really capitalized on this. Her name is Marie Kondo. And Marie Kondo she talks all about decluttering. And some of you probably are very familiar with Marie Kondo. And the North American, or in Japan too, they're looking at her as, oh, she's got this brilliant new idea. And when you think about it, it's been here 2,500 years ago. The Buddha was talking about all this already. And she's just simplifying our life by not attaching to stuff. But again, something that is very difficult to do. Okay, we'll continue on then. Then maybe I will ask.
わからないけどね。これ収容しなさいってことね。
Maybe I'll ask Debbie to read the next two.
Sorry, that's 23 and 24.
Yes, please.
The courageous one who practices concentration, steadfastly persevering and striving at all times, will enter the peace of nirvana. The honor of one who is full of energy, is rightly mindful, is pure in deed, is considerate, is self-controlled, lives the life of the Dharma, and is diligent, will ascend even higher.
Ever higher. Yeah, thank you.
Ever higher.
So again, it does take a lot of, well, according to Buddha, courageous one, who practices concentration, steadfastly persevering and striving at all times. So, to do this constantly does take great effort. And in some sense, this can be parlayed to our normal society as well. When you think of like the top athletes, for instance, Connor McDavid in ice hockey, or Tiger Woods in golf, the amount of effort and concentration that they spent in their skill, crafting their skill, they get to a certain level of both consciousness as well as skillfulness. But of course, that's only going to a certain level. And what the Buddha is talking about here, though, is of course, getting beyond materialism, all materialism. And so it does take a lot of energy, a lot of self-control. And by doing that, they will ascend higher. They will enter a peace of nirvana. Ultimately, the goal of all Buddhists is to attain the state of nirvana. When when you think about it, and the Buddha has mentioned, actually, when we get to the larger Skavati Vyuha Sutra, there is a section where the Buddha talks about those in our society tend to be weak, where those who have possession then worry to maintain that possession, and those that don't have possession are worried to gain that possession. So we tend to be always worrying about either not having it or maintaining what we have. And again, this is all through our attachment to all these things. And so by liberating ourselves, we can free ourselves from the headaches or the sufferings that's created by that. So the question then arises, does this mean that one has to be detached from the world? And I throw that out to you. So why don't we, let's see, let me stop sharing for a second and go to, yeah, we're in the gallery mode. So by reading these passages, what do you think? Well, Greg, you're on tonight, so I'll ask you. do you think this means we have to detach ourselves from the world?
Hmm.
Oh, what happened? Greg went blank. Okay.
Oh, sorry. Well, I don't think it means you have to detach yourself from the world.
Okay.
I think it's the notion of understanding that the attachment is what creates the anxiety in our lives, and to strive to try to release yourself from the attachment, but not to attain perfection.
Okay, thank you. Other thoughts? How about Charlene? Did you want to join in the conversation at all? No, she's on mute. That's okay. Marty and Hugh, did you have any comments on this?
Well, I think if you read what Shakyamuni Buddha wrote, then you would have to think that to have ultimate nirvana, you would have to detach yourself. But that's why I'm Jodo Shinshu. I think you try your darndest and you try your best, and then at some point you live your life. Rely on Amida. Yeah, the middle way.
So, thank you for that. How about you, Michael?
Myself off mute. I think when you think this was written, like it's sort of Theravada leaning, I would think that for monastics, it did mean to be detached from the world.
Okay, thank you. And Les?
Yeah, it doesn't say really that it has to, you have to think of Dharma or think of the teaching and Sangha and everything all the time. I mean, it's time related, I think, as Michael was saying. We can be diligent in our life right now in modern times. We can be mindful, we can be pure indeed, we can do all that stuff. But yeah, it's, I don't know. I think it is difficult.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. What Hugh did you want to pipe in, Hugh? Or
No, I just sort of thinking about the comments that people already made, that without detaching yourself from the world, there is always these temptations and influences around you, and as a human, it's hard to avoid those or tune them out. And yeah, that maybe the point is that detaching yourself, you completely avoid all those things.
okay. How about you, Tomoko? Anything?
I don't think I can detach everything, but I'll try what I'm doing to see myself from somewhere else and as like a third person looking at myself and think what I'm doing.
Well, thank you for all of that. And in fact, what the Buddha said, and there's another passage in which the Buddha talks about even the teachings, you can get attached to it. And he compares it to riding a raft across a river, right? He says, while you're crossing the river, you need that raft. But once you're across that river on terrain, if you start carrying that raft on your back to go to where you're going to, that can be a burden on you. So what the Buddha is saying in that statement is that, you know, when you need it or use it, being appreciative of it while you're using it, but once it's no longer needed, let go of it, right? So the problem is that we don't have, that's the hard part for us, is that letting go of it. We can enjoy something, but then we want more of it and we don't want it to change. And that's where the suffering comes in, right? So the diligence here is again, you can appreciate the moment, you can enjoy the moment, you can live to the fullest in the moment, but also understanding, being able to let go is also a very important aspect. There is a children's story. I can't remember the author now, but it is all about teaching children about death. And this story, it's called Freddie the Leaf. I don't know if any of you have heard this story, Freddie the Leaf. Michael, you're nodding your head. Do you happen to remember the author? I think it was an Italian name. I can't remember his name.
I can't remember the name of the author.
But it's a wonderful story, and it's talking about this leaf on a tree, and it's called Freddie the Leaf. And when he's young, is full of vibrant, and he's strong and green, and all the other leaves around him, all his friends are all very strong and succulent. But as the seasons change, he begins to get a little weaker. And as it gets late in the year, one by one, he begins to see those around him change colors, and he himself begins to change color. And then he sees them falling. And he gets really afraid of this, and he clings as hard as he can to that tree. But in the end, of course, Freddie too has to let go. But when he lets go, it said that he has a wonderful awakening, because as he flutters to the ground, he notices all his friends are down below him. So, this is I'm making it very short, but it's a beautiful little book on passing and mortality. It's called Freddie the Leaf. Oh, wait. The Fall of Freddie the Leaf, book by Leo Buscaglia. Buscaglia? Well, thank you, Greg. It's I think it's a very good read for children. But anyways, again, here they're talking about him clinging as hard as he can, but finally having to let go. And in a way, and I'll jump the gun too, I guess. The Nembutsu teaching is that too. Okay. We try as hard as we might to do things on our own. But in the end, it comes to just letting go and relying on the Dharma, the Buddha, Amida Buddha. In the end, we realize our own foolishness in trying on our own. And by letting go and letting things go, things come much more fluidly. And I've had experiences in my life, both with the building of this wisteria place here at our temple, as well as when I was in Toronto when we built our temple. It's very interesting, when things, if you are receptive to things and you let things go in its natural path, it's funny how things connect, and you find these connections that go beyond, I think, our rational thinking. And I'm not saying it's fate by any means, but I think in Japanese, we have this term called goen. And en is the actual word. And I love this word because I translate it as wondrous encounters, wondrous encounters. And when we have wondrous encounters, what's really important with the wondrous encounters, part of it is the individual being receptive of those encounters. You know, if you're going through life with blinders on, you don't see these encounters that happen. But when you open yourself up, when you don't get too attached to any one particular view per se, then you begin to see all these beautiful encounters that can happen. And I think, you know, the diligence and not attaching just means letting go and being able to encounter these various wondrous encounters by being mindful of each moment. So if you do so, then, you know, when I go back to the many causes and conditions that went into building the temple in Toronto, again, it far exceeds anybody's calculations. And the Wisteria place here, what it's, you know, we've built this senior center, but it all sort of came together, like everything sort of wove in together. And again, these are all wondrous encounters that have happened. But life is full of wondrous encounters if we happen to be receptive of them. And I think that's a very important aspect of the Dharma. And what we're talking about when we're talking about diligence is being aware, and by being mindful, then you open yourself up to having these encounters. I mean, I could go on and on about encounters because life is just full of them. It's very interesting though. Sorry, I got off topic a little bit, I think. 26 and 27, no. 25, okay. I'll just read from here. By bracing himself, oh wait. Oh yeah, that's right, okay. By bracing himself up through diligence, discipline, and self-control, the wise person will make for himself an island not overwhelmed by the flood of defilements, okay? When we think about what's been going on in BC, and in fact, one of the, obviously it's been devastating, the floods that have been going on through many areas of the lower mainland and as well as the interior. But at the same time, there have been islands of humanity that have been reported on the news. I'm sure you've all seen various wonderful acts that have been occurring. And those things come about because people are diligent, because they have discipline in humanity. And so again, these passages, I think, you could take them and you could actually go beyond boundaries of religion when we look at it, right? It is the wise person who forgoes of themselves to help others, and through their efforts, because they're caring, truly caring about others. And that's part of the Buddhist practice as well. But it doesn't just have to be Buddhism. This is about life itself. So, you know, what we've seen during this hard time are also some very wise and generous actions of individuals. And this analogy that they create an island not overwhelmed by the flood of defilements, right? So they can be overwhelmed by a physical flood, but through their humanity, their compassion, their wisdom, they create an island for those who are in despair, right? So not overwhelmed by the flood of defilements. The ignorant and unwise person is indolent. The wise person guards diligence as the most precious treasure, right? So it's very straightforward, of course. The ignorant are, they don't pay attention to mindful of others, mindful of the moment, whereas the wise, it guards diligence as a precious treasure. So by being mindful of our surroundings, being mindful of others, being mindful of the environment, these things are all very important to us. And it is, we do have different ways of looking at things. Each of us have different ways of looking at things, but all of us can be mindful of our actions, and all of us can share in that mindfulness with one another. Do not give way to indolence or to the pleasure of lust. One who is diligent and meditative will attain great peace. So of course, you've all heard of how lust can, there have been empires that have fallen because of lust and greed, right? So one who is diligent and meditative will attain great peace, right? And this, I mean, it's an old age story that you can see in all cultures through life, is that to have true peace and peace of heart, you know, what is really important in that? And of course, it's to do away with lust, right? So Mom, next time you go to a casino, think about this. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I should be saying that to myself. But we're all that way, right? We can all get into that, being overwhelmed with our desires. Yeah. The wise person destroys negligence with diligence and ascends to the tower of wisdom. Freed from all worries, he looks upon the ignorant like a person who climbs the top of a mountain and gazes down on those standing on the level ground, right? So, I have some difficulty with this because it, I think one of the things that's missing in some of these passages is the thought of compassion. So it's talking about, you know, the wise rising above all others and then looking down at them as people down below. But I think from the Mahayana perspective, the branch of Buddhism that we belong to, the wise would not rise to the top of the mountain unless everybody rises together, right? That's the Mahayana viewpoint. It's not, I am going to ascend the mountain and look down upon others. But, and if you read between the lines here, it's almost like they're pitying the others that are down below. And I don't think that's really how our branch of Buddhism would understand things. Because in the Mahayana school, the Bodhisattva perfections are what is emphasized. And the Bodhisattva perfections means that unless all beings attain enlightenment, I will not attain enlightenment. So it would be very difficult for a wise person to say, I'm going to ascend when all others are down below. So I have personal problems with passages like this, where it makes it seem like you're looking only about your own self. A person of wisdom who is diligent among the negligent and awake among the sleeping will outrun the ignorant like a fleet steed that outruns the haps. again, here, they're talking about how the person who is wise and diligent will outrun the others. And again, to me, it's putting this dichotomy or this discrimination amongst others. Indra rose to become the king of the gods by diligence. The diligent are praised while the indolent are disparaged. So it's interesting how the Indra comes out. And again, this is very not uncommon in Buddhist literatures, yet you will find crossover between Hinduism and Buddhism. And Indra comes out, of course, in Hindu literature as well. But, and in fact, what's really interesting is if you go on the pilgrimage to the sites where the Buddha was at, Muddy and Hugh, you were there 3 years ago, was it? 3 years, more, longer? What year was that?
4 or 5 years, I think, more.
Yeah.
Four, okay. So when you guys went, I don't know if it changed at all, but when I went near 2000, all the Buddhist sites were actually, the custodians of the Buddhist sites were all Hindus. Was that still the same when you went?
I don't know.
So how you would know this is that a lot of them would have little shrines of Hindu shrines by them as well. And like if you, I noticed this at a number of the sites that they were all Hindus who were looking after, because they weren't practicing. Well, there are Buddhists there, but they tend to be from other places in the world. In India, in fact, Buddhism has become a very small percentage of the population. But the Hindus have no problems in worshiping Buddha because Shakyamuni Buddha is seen to be an incarnation of Shiva, any one of the Hindu gods. Anyways, so Indra here coming out. What's interesting about Indra, though, when we normally talk about Indra, we talk about equality. And Muddy, you're probably familiar with the story of the Indra's net, where we talk about there's a net in the universe, Indra's net, and each eye of the net has a jewel, and each jewel sparkles on its own, but it's also sparkling, radiating the reflections of all the other jewels. And that's what they're talking about, the interconnectedness of all the universe. So here it's talking more about looking at the indolent as disparagingly, but in fact, when we talk about Indra, normally we talk about the quality of all things. So it's interesting how there's this different ways of interpreting or presenting the same individual. One who delights in diligence and is fearful of self-indulgence burns away like fire the bonds of defilements, big or small. Again, stressing the fact of diligence. He who delights in diligence and is fearful of negligence will not fall back. He is close to nirvana. So again, all of these passages, and if I go back to, where was that? No. If I go back to sharing my screen again, and not this one, but all of these are talking about right effort and right action, could even be right livelihood, you know, being diligent in how we do things, being mindful of how we do things. So mindfulness, all of this falls into it. But being, there's a great emphasis on trying to maintain this or fulfill this. And then also he talks again about the mind. So the next section is on the mind. Like a fletcher who straightens the arrow, the wise person straightens the trembling mind, which is difficult to guard and difficult to restrain. Like a fish taken from its watery abode and thrown upon the ground, the mind struggles to escape the dominion of Mara. So again, now he's talking about, you know, controlling the mind, and the person who guards or restrains himself is like the fletcher who straightens the arrow. All these things are great and wonderful, but as most of you have mentioned, that's why we're quote unquote Jodo Shishu followers, perhaps, because as wonderful as this is, it is very, very difficult to do. Like a fish taken from its watery abode, thrown upon the ground, the mind struggles to escape the dominion of Mara. So in many ways, we are like, you know, we're floundering to find out what is true and what is real. And most of us have difficulty escaping from the. So remember, I guess that would have been in the spring lecture series when I had actually talked about where Mara, maybe I'll bring that up. Let me bring that one up. I'm just gonna bring up something again from the spring lectures. And oops, where did that go? Sorry, just give me 2 seconds, I'll bring it right up. Do you remember me showing you this tanka, the Tibetan
Oh, yes.
drawing art? And so in the Buddhist cosmology, or the way they look things, they talk about the 6 realms of suffering. And these are depicted here in these drawings here. The bottom one is what we call hell. And it's very much what you can imagine hell to be like. You see, you can see people being burned in the fire, sea of fire. You can see person having their tongue pulled out of their mouth and nailed to the ground. You have people that have been speared onto these, I don't know what they are, but all these things are the hell. And then you have above the hell, the realm of what we call the hungry ghosts, and they're also suffering just like hell. And then over to the left, you have the realm of beasts, and they only live by instinct. They have no conscience. And above them is what we call the fighting spirits, so always fighting. And then here we have the human realm on the right. And then right at the top here, and there's 6 heavenly existence, but it's still within the world of suffering, samsara. Okay, this is all what we call samsara. And even what we call the heavenly realms is sort of a pseudo heavenly realm. And in fact, Mara, so many of us think Mara is the king of the hell, realm of hell. But Mara is actually the head of this heavenly realm, okay? And so Mara wants to keep all beings within this realm of the 6 realms of samsara, or suffering. And that's why Mara had the great battle with Shakyamuni Buddha before he attained enlightenment, because Shakyamuni was trying to break free of these realms of suffering, right? go beyond that. And so right here on this passage 34, like a fish taken from its watery abode and thrown upon the ground, the mind struggles to escape the dominion of Mara, right? So what it's saying here is the mind struggles to escape the dominion of samsara. So all these 6 realms, right? Our human realm as well. We, again, because of our attachment to things, we have a very difficult time escaping from that dominion. And according to the Theravada or to the Dhammapada, it is only through strict diligence, mindfulness, effort that you can control yourself and get beyond that. Okay. It is good to control this mind, which is difficult to control, is frivolous, and runs about as it wishes. The controlled mind alone brings peace. There are some passages that call it the monkey mind, right? Always busy jumping from one thing to another. Sometimes we refer to as scatterbrains, right? And I think all of us have that. You may, sometimes I find myself doing this in the middle of chanting as a minister, especially if it's with the Zoom going on. I am responsible. I look after, controlling the computer while I'm chanting and I'm hitting the gong here. And so my mind is all over the place. And then sometimes I look down at my book and I've lost where I was chanting. So that happens. And that's because my mind is not there, right? And actually, there's to bring in some pop culture here. Has any of you seen The Last Samurai with Tom? No, yeah, what was his name? Tom Cruise. Do you remember? Yeah. There's one scene that's really good in that movie where Tom Cruise, he's captured by the samurai clan, and he's taken back to the village, and he's held there till the following spring. But as he's originally held as a captive, but he's free to move around the village. And as he begins to see the people, he begins to see a different aspect to them. Very similar to, I guess, Dances with Wolves, where what's his name? Kevin Costner sees the indigenous people and that they're not savages. Similarly, Tom Cruise realizes that the samurai are in fact very honorable people. And there's one scene where he begins to learn how to fight with, they used a wooden sword at that time. But he constantly gets beaten up by the person he's learning from. And one young samurai tells Tom Cruise, he says, too many minds, he says. Be mindful of this, mindful of that. So in Japanese, there is a terminology, mushin. Mushin means to empty the mind, to empty the heart, the soul. And by emptying it, being completely open. And so, it's a development of Tom Cruise's idea that he's so mindful or concerned about all the things going on around him. He's not mindful or just focusing on that moment. So controlling the mind is very, very important. And again, in Buddhism, when we talk about all the things like karma, where there's the mind, the speech, and the body, and of course the mind is the most important of the 3 actions of karma. And so controlling the mind helps us control our speech and our actions as well. And it can bring us true peace. Okay. The wise person restrains this mind, which is so subtle that it is difficult to perceive, and which runs about at will. This guarded mind alone brings peace. Again, they're talking about the monkey mind of, running about amok. That's how our normal minds normally work. Incidentally, there are a couple of Japanese characters. Maybe I'll introduce them to you. Okay. The first character, let me just pull something up here. Oh, well, I'll just explain it to you. So the character for child, ko, kodomo no ko, okay, ko. It's this character, if you write it, now next week I'll have it written for you. But it's basically, a child has a very large head, and so is off balance, okay? So when you look at ko, it's a large head, and it's trying to balance itself, okay? So when we are unbalanced, it's because we're, and the word for busy also is a good word to know, isogashi, because this character, and I get, oh, you know what? I think I have this character somewhere here. Oh, thank you, Muddy. Okay, but that's cool. And you can see, you can see it looks like this little toddler with its hands, but it's got a very large head, right? So it's top head heavy, basically. So unbalanced, right? And when we think about ourselves, when we feel really busy and running around, it's because we're getting top heavy, okay? And that's why we feel flustered and busy. And that's why Buddhism emphasizes with meditation. It's one of the things you're doing is you're lowering your center of gravity, right? Because you always have to have that. If you have a lower center of gravity, you have balance. And so when we meditate, we're calming ourselves down, we're lowering that center of gravity. And in fact, when you look at the incense burner behind me, that's also a symbol of this. It's got the 3 legs and it's got a low center of gravity. And again, that's all to do with balance, okay? So if you have a mind that's running all over, your mind is basically, you're becoming top heavy. So it's like the metronome, the metronome, piano metronome, it goes back and forth, and that's top heavy, right? It goes back and forth because it's top heavy. But you want to be, well, maybe that's not a good example, but basically it's much better to have a lower center of gravity. And in fact, in Japanese, there's a commonly used terminology they call hara ga suwaru. Hara ga suwaru, which means your stomach is rooted. Okay, so what that means is lowering your center of gravity. Okay? So in all of martial arts, that's one of the primary or first things to learn is the lower you have center of gravity, the less the stronger you are, basically, right? And in fact, in sumo, that's also, they try to raise the other person. So the higher center of gravity, the easier it is for them to topple over, right? So again, guarding the mind, this is lowering the center of gravity so that you don't get swayed by the various things that occur. Traveling afar, alone, formless, and hiding in the cave of the heart is the mind. One who controls the mind will free himself from the bondages of Mara. So here, I really don't. Well, I guess more the controlling the mind is the important part. I guess it's saying where the mind is in the heart, the cave of the heart. Okay. So interesting enough, Les,
Yes,
can you point to yourself? When you say me, where do you point to?
heart.
You just point here? When you say me, you point here? Okay. I thought, wait, I always thought that in the West, we point here. No, we point,
Here.
no, we point, okay, well, here, okay.
Sure.
So, well, maybe I mistaken that. Never mind.
Me, yeah.
Yeah. In Japan, we do here.
Oh, we point here. Okay, so in Japan, we point here.
Japan, dude, yeah.
No,
And the
no.
West, we point here. Okay. So
Me.
when we talk about, so in Japanese, there's a word called kokoro, right? Kokoro, which is, can be translated as heart or mind, or it's the center of being, kokoro. Sometimes spirit or soul, or, and again, it's when they're talking about hiding in the cave of the heart. So here they're saying the mind is in the heart. So in Japanese too, kokoro, the mind and the heart are one and the same. Okay, I think in the West we have a tendency to separate. We don't think of the mind and the heart as being the same, or do we?
No.
We don't, like, we normally think mind up here and heart down here, right? But in Japan, the mind and heart, or in Asia, mind and heart are very much the same. It's the center of being. So when we talk about heart in a physical sense, that's different. But when we're talking about more of a spiritual sense of heart and mind are basically sort of interwoven. So when it says here, in the cave of the heart is the mind, right? So that's the idea that mind and heart are one and the same. It's now 8:30 and I saw Mariani, so maybe we'll stop here for tonight. Thank you all for, so we'll stop off with this one here, number 37. We'll go on from there. Are there any comments or questions?
I have a question, Grant.
Yes.
In one of the things we read, it said concentration. Where was it? One of the first ones we read. Oh, 23. The courageous one who practiced concentration. Does he mean like meditation in there? Or what does he mean by concentration?
So it could be both meditation or mindfulness. All of that is implied in there. Let's see, if we look at this again. So it's right concentration to awaken to true reality of the Buddha Dharma. So having focus, and of course that implies in meditation as well, but not just while you're meditating, but focus throughout life. So having the right focus of things. So concentration in that sense is, focusing on the Dharma, or what is right and what is real.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments or? Naomi, you haven't said anything tonight.
Well, since you're asking, one question I would have is the idea of controlling the mind. Sometimes I think controlling the mind could, I have a little bit of trouble with that, because even though we want to do things in a good way, sometimes we put too much pressure on ourselves. So that was a question I had.
That's a very good question. And I think that's something for us to ponder. And in fact, we don't do this in Jodo Shinshu, but in Zen Buddhism, they call them koans. And basically koans are paradoxical questions. You've all heard the famous ones, like the sound of the tree falling in an empty forest, or the single-handed clap. And so basically the disciples or practitioners would receive these questions, and they would have to go and meditate on it. And so controlling the mind would very much be a koan for all of us to think about. Well, what does that mean, controlling the mind? And I agree with you. That can be taken out of context. It can be very self-serving as well. So here, though, what I do believe, well, maybe you could think about it. Well, we'll think about it and then maybe talk about it next week. What you think controlling the mind means.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions or comments?
No.
No. Okay. Well, thank you, everyone, and we'll just continue on next week.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sensei.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you,
night, everyone.
Thank you, Sensei.
Before you go,
Bye.
everyone.
Before you go, he said.
Yeah, before you go, I just wanted to let you know, so what I'm planning on doing is continue on probably till the second week of December, and then we'll take a break because things get busy around the year end, so.
Okay. Yeah.
What
Good
do you
night.
mean by? Thank you.
What do you mean by second week? Second week of December is, let's see, so that would be going up till December 14th.
December
14th will be the last one for this time. And then we'll start up probably maybe, late January or February.
Okay. Okay, good night.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.